historically, what group is most aligned with the Marxists? Where do you find it preeminently in the strongest cases? It's always at the Ivies. There's a sickness there, and it comes directly from the fact that these kids grew up in homes with too much money. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Luke Reacts. Listen, this time it's going to be great because we are going to talk all about all these people who are getting deported, not let into the country because they support terrorism. And that's going to be cool. So if you will, before we get started, like and subscribe to our channel here on YouTube, it would be amazing. We are just now hit 24,000 people who are subscribers. And if you are one of them, thank you so much. If you are not yet one of them, please join us. And that way you can get the updates on all the cool things that we are putting on this channel. Now, I'm going to start with this woman named Dr. Rasha Alawieh. Okay. Now, I was minding my own business on Sunday, and I came across, I was on Facebook, because I'm of the age that is people who watch or listen and are on Facebook. And I came across one of these groups I'm a part of, which is kind of a squishy, liberalish Christian group called Charles Malik Society for Redeeming Reason. And they had posted this story, and it starts out #SaveImmigrantDoctors. And I was like, oh, okay, what's this? And then I'll read you what they posted. Providence. A Rhode Island doctor has been deported after returning from a trip to Lebanon to visit her parents. Rasha Alawieh was prevented from re-entering the United States at Boston's Logan International Airport on Thursday evening and has since been put on a plane headed for Paris. Dr. Rasha, who lived in Providence, Rhode Island, and had been working at Brown Medical Medicine since last July. She's been studying and working in the United States about 6 years. The U.S. consulate in Lebanon had issued her a H-1B visa, which was given to people in specialty occupations requiring expertise. And her visa was valid through mid-2027, her attorney, Thomas S. Brown, said. Okay. And then, according to Dr. George Bayliss, the organ transplant division's medical director, a lawyer filed a petition with the U.S. District Court in Massachusetts, and Judge Leo T. Sorokin issued an order saying Aloi should not be moved outside of Massachusetts without 48 hours notice. But he said that the message apparently did not reach immigration officials in time, and a plane carrying Aloi left for Paris. This is outrageous, Bayliss said in an interview. This is a person who is legally entitled to be in the U.S., who is stopped from re-entry the country for reasons no one knows. It's depriving her patients of a good physician. Then it has a bunch of articles, right? So that was the story. And I was like, I don't know. I feel like there's probably more to the story than this. There's probably more because, one of the things was her last name. Now, her last name, Alawieh, is interesting because one of the main sects of, in Syria, actually the one that the former head of Syria, Bashar Assad, his family was an Alawite. And Alawite and Alawieh are very close to each other. I was like, oh, I wonder if they have the same roots. Oh, it turns out they likely do. And which means that perhaps she's Shia. And if she's in Lebanon and she's Shia, I wonder if she's been involved at all with Hezbollah, which is the Shia terrorist organization that has been mostly decimated by Israel over the last 6 months, but is still, it still has some power. Now, it turns out, guess what? I was right. And how do I know that was right? Well, it turns out a couple days later. Why was she deported? Well, she was deported because she went to the former leader of Hezbollah's funeral in Lebanon. This guy, Nasrallah, He was the both physical, like spiritual, and military leader of Hezbollah. And she attended the funeral. You know who else attended the funeral? There was a bunch of neo-Nazis attended the funeral, and a bunch of other Hezbollah dignitaries and other. I mean, I don't know. I'm a little disappointed that Israel didn't just finish its work by taking out or taking care of Hezbollah there. But nonetheless, that's it. It's still, Hezbollah is still alive and kicking, unfortunately. And she attended, this woman, Dr. Rasha Alawieh. She didn't just go see her parents, which is what she said. She went to see Nasrallah's funeral. Okay, so and the when she was being investigated at the border with the CBP, the Border Patrol, they were looking through her phone and found a bunch of pro Hezbollah pictures and stuff like that were on her deleted files on her phone. And then she admitted to attending Nasrallah's funeral, but then claimed, "Oh, I was just, I saw him as a religious and moral leader." Okay, well, I guess that works. That might be an argument, but not a good one. So that is, she was gone. So she got basically not allowed back into the country. And this keeps happening. These examples where people who think that supporting terrorists comes at no cost and it's totally fine. And in the last administration, that was possible. In this one, it's not. One of the things that the Trump administration has been doing a great job, I think, of trolling the pro-terrorist sympathizing immigrants who keep getting deported. And so there was a tweet that the White House put out just yesterday that depicted when Trump was serving at McDonald's and was leaning out of the drive-through window, and the White House tweeted bye-bye. I'm not gonna lie, that's kind of funny. That just shows exactly. I mean, there's such a contrast between how this administration and the last one are handling people who support terrorists. Because the last one claimed that they were against, Hezbollah and Hamas and the terrorists and all these sorts of people. But when it came down to it, they weren't kicking any of them out of the country. They weren't holding the universities accountable for the people in these places who were disrupting students, who were taking over buildings. I mean, they took over the Hamilton Hall and the library and wouldn't let people come and go. They held a janitor at Columbia. These groups held a janitor hostage. Okay, now this woman, Miss Aloi, Dr. Aloi, was not at Columbia. She was at Brown, but Brown also had its own problems. Most of the Ivy League universities, there's a direct correlation between the cost and the amount of money that a university costs and the degree to which they were terrorist sympathizers. And that's not a surprise, because historically, what do you find? What group is most aligned with, the Marxists? And that would be rich kids, right? Because they didn't feel like they didn't earn their wealth. They just get it by having to be born in a certain family, and they can have the luxury belief that communism is a good way to go, or Marxism is a good ideology, and capitalism is exploitative, all that sort of stuff, which is not true, and it's never worked anywhere, anyways. But it's always it's a luxury belief for the rich. And when you find it, where do you find it? Preeminently, in the strongest cases, at these places like this, Harvard, Brown, Columbia, Yale, you list them. There's like places where there's been these encampments and takeovers and all that. It's always at the Ivies. There's a sickness there, and it comes directly from the fact that these kids grow up in homes with too much money, and it ruins their minds. So we got the second case here. The second case is this woman, and I'm gonna butcher her name. I butcher everybody's names. So if you know me, you know that I really struggle with people's. I struggle remembering people's names, and then if I do remember them, I remember them wrong. Uh, and even my producer on this show right now, I misspelled her name the other day, even though I've known her for a decade. So, which is just par for the course. It's unfortunate. It's a mental disorder, I think. Okay, so Rajani Srinivasan. Okay, that's as good as it gets. Okay, I'll just refer to it as Rajani after this. So Rajani is a doctoral student in urban planning at Columbia who heard that she was on the list to be deported and self-deported as a result. So she went to Canada. She's of Indian origin, but she flew off to Canada in part because she foresaw what was going to happen. She saw what had happened to this other guy, Mahmoud Khalil, who is currently held in detention in Louisiana, and she did not want that. And so she self-deported herself to Canada. Now she is claiming she's a like I said, a Columbia University doctoral student, and she participated in the takeover of Hamilton Hall. And she claims that she was arrested. She was wrongfully arrested, that she was actually just trying to get to her apartment. But when you look at like she admitted she participated in some of these protests and the encampments, and she has posted a ton on Twitter and been a very strong opponent. So I think that she's got a weak story. I suspect that if she was put under oath, that story would fall apart. That she knows she was arrested for having been part of the group that took over Hamilton Hall. And now she did an interview on CBS News in which she's claiming, the reason she self-deported was she didn't want to end up in some detention for a long time. And, she saw the handwriting on the wall. And if she self-deports, it gives her a better chance of coming back eventually, which is true. I mean, the Kristi Noem, who is the head of Department of Homeland Security, she has said that people who self-deport have the chance to come back in the future. But if you are forced out of this country, if you are kicked out of the country, deported, then you will never be allowed to come back. And I suspect that Miss Ranjan would like to come back to the country. I mean, who knows what happens with where she's at in her degree. But again, one of the things that you are seeing over and over is the fact that there is a cost to supporting terrorism in the United States. And that is so refreshing. It is one of the things that months and months and months ago, as before the election, as things were unfolding, as Trump was getting the nomination, and we were talking about what we would like to see under a Trump administration in regard to the anti-Semitism we're seeing on campus. What did we want to see? We wanted to see students and faculty, people who are on green cards, people who are on student visas, being deported for supporting terrorism, whether they supported Hamas, Hezbollah, name your terrorist organization, it didn't matter. But if it's a U.S. designated terrorist organization, there's a lot of room. I participated in an event with the Speaker of the House, Speaker Johnson, his team, where they had looked into several things: the role of the education institutions in regard to not doing enough to fight the anti-Semitism on campus. There was the effort that was being done to highlight where some of the funding was coming from for these activities. There's a whole bunch of work that was being done, and one of the things that a large group of us had been pushing was the deportation of people who are on visas into the United States who are showing up in support. Now, I was asked about some of these cases by Jewish Insider, which is a publication out of DC, and asked if these cases where of students and green card holders and HB1 visa holders are, is the Trump administration picking the wrong fights? And I said, no, they're not picking the wrong fight. These are the fights to have, because it's one thing to kick out a student on a student visa. That seems like actually kind of easy. It's the student visa is kind of a low tier visa. Okay. They give them out fairly easily. Whereas the green cards and some of the work visas, like the one that, this doctor, Miss Rasha Alawieh, was on, those are harder to come by. They're special. They're special visas, right? And to lose them would send the kind of signal that is important to send, that the U.S. is not going to tolerate supporters of terrorism in their midst. Okay. And that is, to me, very important. If it was just a student visa, because it was so often, if you saw the kind of what was going on with these protests, so often the organizers, the kind of the assistance that was being given to and cover that was being provided to the students who were in these encampments, the support they were getting, who was providing that support? It was the faculty. And when the students were being expelled, or expelled for a couple of years or suspended for a year, something like that, who was advocating on their behalf? It was other faculty. And these faculty who were supporting these student protests, these student demonstrations, the encampments, the harassment of Jewish students. There was a Jewish student in Indiana University. We visited there a few months ago, who was attacked in her classroom by a professor for being Jewish. Okay, that's the kind of stuff that was happening all over the country. It wasn't just name calling and that kind. It was actual physical harassment, consistently, over and for no other reason than being Jewish. And so to have the faculty feel the pressure, because this doctor who was not allowed back into the country for visiting Nasrallah's funeral, okay, she was a professor at Brown. Was she involved in any of what was her role in some of these encampments, these protests? And what about, the Jews who were receiving care from her? Were they being treated well? Or was it like, oh, we got to put this needle in your arm and you miss a couple of times? You don't know. But if she's supporting a terrorist organization who wants to drive the Jews into the sea, one could make it's not a big leap to say, hey, it might not be great to have a terrorist supporter as a doctor here in the United States. And so I'm very, very pleased with the direction that the administration is going vis-a-vis these deportations, or even self-deportations. The fact that there was this student who is now going off out of the United States, went off to Canada. It's good. I don't want him in the country. Okay. This Red Green Alliance, we celebrated this last week, Purim, and Haman. The story of Esther of which Purim is a kind of celebration of. There's this guy Haman who wants to wipe out all the Jews. And what is Haman's? Is a descendant of the Amalekites. And who are the Amalekites? The Amalekites were the group that attacked the Israelites from behind, killing the women and children and elderly when they were when Israel was wandering in the desert. Okay. And God told Saul in the book of Samuel that he was supposed to wipe out the Amalekites, and he did not. And as a result, that was one of the reasons why he lost the kingdom to David. And there's a belief among the Jewish sages that say when the sons of Edom, and that's the pagans, and the sons of Ishmael, that's the Islamists, when they come together, they form the spirit of Amalek. And that's what we're seeing here. Once again, we're seeing this spirit of Amalek form. This red-green alliance is forming. And who is the biggest champion right now of these people who are being deported? It's the Marxist. It is. And unfortunately for the the reasonable Democrats. The Democratic Party seems to be really, really bothered by the deportation of terrorists. That's a real problem. All right, let me get to this last guy, and it's probably the one that's been in the news the most. And we've already, Dominique has already done an episode on this as well. But let me just kind of bring this full circle to where it kind of started. These deportations, they were coming, but the first one was when ICE picked up this guy Mahmoud Khalil, who was also at Columbia. He was an organizer of the protests, of the encampments. He was often a spokesperson. When the library was taken over a couple months ago, he was involved in that. He was a spokesman in there. He was an organizer of a bunch of the marches in New York City. There's some depictions of him wearing pro-Hamas sweatshirt that was, had some writing against Zionists. He was one of the leaders of an organization on Columbia called Quad, CUAD, which stands for Columbia University Apartheid Divest. And this group had put out tons of statements in support of Hamas. They had said that we support liberation by any means necessary, including armed resistance. There was regularly passing out literature that was written and was to be disseminated, but it was written by the media wing of Hamas. It had its label on it, so it was not mysterious. It's not like there's no connection. And even so, if the requirement was material support for terrorism, Mahmoud Khalil reaches that bar. Actually, if material support for terrorism it would be like if an American citizen provided material support for terrorism, they will be arrested and charged, and they can do time in jail or fines or whatever. But there's a cost to it. Okay, when you're when you're a legal immigrant, and when you fill out the form and you're asked a bunch of questions when you're applying for your application, and on that form, you have to agree that you've not participated, nor will you anticipate participating in any kind of terrorist activity or support for terrorism. And he said he has no intention of doing that. And then here he is at Columbia University doing this very thing. And Schoen is supporting this. Schoen is passing out literature, and that is providing material support. But the bar for an immigrant into the United States on a visa, so not a citizen. He's this Mahmoud guy has a green card, and he's considered a permanent resident. That can be withdrawn, and he doesn't have to have been charged with a crime or anything. He can just lose his visa. Now, I have friends who have green cards, and I had one friend who was in the process of becoming a U.S. citizen, and that is a long process, by the way. He had a green card for many years, and in that process, there was a point in which, because he was traveling a lot and he was traveling overseas a lot, that the immigration service, when he came in, one last, after he'd been gone a ton, said, "Hey, listen, you got to stop traveling so much out of the country because you could lose this green card that you have if you do that." And so that was, he risked losing his green card over too much travel and was warned by Border Patrol on that. So you have Khalil, this guy Khalil, Mahmoud Khalil, who has basically, he's being held in Louisiana, he was going to be deported, but his deportation is being held back by a judge who has to rule on this. Whatever happens, it will no doubt be appealed. And some of these cases will end up at the Supreme Court. But the U.S. State Department is not obligated to like the person doesn't have to have committed a crime. Whatever the Secretary of State deems a threat, that person can be deported without any other reason. Okay. But there was enough there There's enough information there, enough bad stuff there to justify his departure. So it wasn't so this guy Mahmoud Khalil has not only was he involved in Quad on Columbia University campus, but one of the things that this group Quad was supportive of, beyond just the calls for armed resistance and the celebration of October 7th and being really happy about all the killing of Jews, that they also had book clubs, readings on this group called PFLP, which is the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Now PFLP, for those who don't know, is the Marxist terrorist organization that is one of most of the terrorist organizations in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. Most of those terrorist organizations are affiliated in some way with Islam. Okay. PFLP, Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, is the Marxist one. So they're not Islamists, they're Marxists, means most of them are atheists. Actually, PFLP has a lot of Christians involved in it. And you're saying, Luke, how can there be Christians involved with the Palestinian terrorist organization? Well, because in the West, we confuse Christianity often with faith. Okay, we believe that a person is a Christian by faith, not by just because your last name is whatever it is doesn't necessarily mean you're a Christian. Or, because your family is historically Christian doesn't make you a Christian. Okay. What makes you a Christian is believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. That's what makes you a Christian. Okay. Now there's a bunch of all over Israel, actually in the city of Nazareth, okay, which was for a long time a Christian majority city, which is now a Christian minority city, as is most of the places where Christians have resided in the Middle East are now Christians are minorities. I was one time getting a haircut. I think I've told this story maybe once or twice on this show. Getting a haircut one time in Nazareth, and I said to my barber, "Are you Muslim or Christian?" Because it was an Arab guy, and he goes, "I'm Christian." And I said, "Well, what church do you go to?" He said, "I don't go to church. I'm an atheist." And so that seems strange to people, Americans particularly. Like, how can you be a Christian atheist? Well, it's because this guy, his Christian identity was in his last name or his first name, even in his family name, in his family, his clan, his group of people. They were Christian, but he didn't believe in it. And actually, the most popular and the biggest communist party in Israel is made up mostly of Christians, and particularly Christians in like areas like Nazareth. And so PFLP is populated by a large number of Arab Christians who self-identify that way, self-identify as Christians, but they're Christian by family origin only and tradition. They're not involved in any kind of church. They're often atheists, and so it's one of the challenges. When in the West, we are shown and told about the suffering Palestinian Christians. And our assumption is that these Palestinian Christians that we're talking about are all, faithful, Jesus believing Christians. And the reality is that they're not always that. Okay. One of the founders of PFLP was a Christian. It was, I think, founded in Jordan. One of the main leaders right now is a Christian. There's a woman who is being held in administrative detention by Israel. She was formerly at Birzei University, I think, which is one of the Palestinian universities, and she was picked up, and even the Archbishop of Canterbury, made reference, said she was being, falsely detained, and nobody's heard from her. And you look her up, and she was involved with PFLP. Not surprised. I'm not surprised, okay? Because Israel's not going to pick up some, regular Palestinian Christian who's doing, evangelism and helping the poor and the widow and the orphan and doing that kind of stuff is not going to happen. What are they going to pick up? They're going to pick up the one that's like running the PFLP chapter, right? So it's no surprise that Mahmoud Khalil, I don't know if I believe he is a Muslim. He is one of the sneaky things that the pro Mahmoud Khalil team did was they had this big press conference on the steps of some, outside, I don't know, federal courthouse or something like that in New York, and they had this woman read out a statement from his wife, and you would, looking at this, be perceived, oh, this is his wife, because and because everybody was talking about how his wife's 8 months pregnant and and it turns out it was just a random person. It wasn't his wife reading the statement, because his wife wears a hijab and his wife's Muslim, and which probably means that he's Muslim too. So that whole story, there's a lot of it wouldn't obviously going to work its way, I think, probably through the courts. Some of these are going to take longer than they should, but at the end of the day, the Trump administration is in the right and has the ability to do whatever it needs to do vis-a-vis this, these people who are being held, or detained or sent out of the country, whatever. What is going to happen when what is already happening is that there is a chilling effect on all these terrorist sympathizers in these campuses. No doubt moms and dads are calling their kid and saying, hey, don't you dare participate in any of these protests. Don't take over any buildings. Don't do this stuff. And then, people who are on green cards, who are helping organize, these professors who are helping organize these pro-Hamas events, they are also going to probably be a bit more quiet. They're going to hush up. There are going to be less protests. There's going to be less of these things. And that was the desired effect. You don't need to do it all. You just need to do it a few times. And that's what we advocated for months and months and months in last year. And we're seeing that Trump kept good on his promise that he would do what he could to help fight the terrorist supporters here in the United States. So that's a good thing, because one of the things that is coming is I'm a guy on the right, okay, and most of what I can do with this kind of red-green alliance on the left is to kind of highlight it, go at it, fight it, show up and protest it or counter-protest it, that kind of thing. But at the same time, we have this growing noisy group on the right who is becoming increasingly anti-Semitic and increasingly unafraid of their anti-Semitism. I mean, Joe Rogan had on this guy who was like, well, Hitler was from this small town in Germany and da da da. I'm like, well, that's not even actually true. Hitler was Austrian. And this guy said, he didn't say anything anti-Semitic until after the war started. No, Hitler's first go at the Jews was in 1922, so a long time before he was even in charge of anything. Okay, and these kinds of normalizing total lies and falsehood is not sufficient. And the fact that this guy was on Joe Rogan and Joe didn't call him out on it or challenge it just seems so unfortunate. It seems like there's on the right, there's a lot of unforced errors on this stuff. And my hope is that those of us on the right will seize this moment, this opportunity, this time, and do what we can to fight back against this rising threat on the right. So on the left, these pro Hamas and pro terrorist sympathizers getting deported. On the right, we're creating this firewall, the seawall against this wave of anti-Semitism that seems to be rising on the right. And we will do whatever we can. We need as many of you to stand with us as possible. So again, please like and subscribe to this show. If you please support financially the work of the Fields Project. I think nobody else is positioned to fight this scourge of anti-Semitism like the Fields Project is able to. We are not Jews. I have one Jewish guy who works for me. but the rest of us are Christians, and we are doing what we can to make sure that we are good friends and allies of Israel and the Jewish people, because they are still special in God's eyes and still have a place in God's redemptive plan for the world, and we want to support them. And so we need your support in order to do that. So please give us a donation would be amazing. So thank you so much for watching this. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, this is Luke Moon.